non-fiction book on business titled Mask Behind the Face, and worked with the Tata Trust as special advisor. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored and excited to be here with all of you on this wonderful webinar to demystify the biggest issue that we are all facing here today, cash management. So Manish, may I request that you can take the first question? You can be brave. I would like to start with asking you that, clearly manufacturing has had huge cost implications, primarily because of the fixed costs. Wanted to understand, for the benefit of our audience, how are you thinking about these costs, especially perhaps the variable and the fixed, and perhaps variabilizing the fixed? I know you have some deep insights, so please take it away.
Okay, thank you, Sunit. I'll try and unmute my microphone, and hopefully you can all see me and hear me audibly. I'm in the minority here. I haven't written a book by hearing introductions, but I think so is Akshay. We'll try and make up after this webinar. But thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. You're right. We run 6 factories in India, and for us, fixed costs is what certainly keeps me up at night in a manufacturing setup. And if we don't manage the fixed costs, it can get out of control very, very quickly. Fixed costs can whip us out of business in a downturn like this, but managed well will help us also ride the storm out. We all know in the long term, all fixed costs are variable. That's a fact in the very long term. In the short term, it becomes a little tricky, especially in cases like this. What actions do you take and to get those fixed costs under control? It's not always easy to eliminate fixed costs. It's a tough one to manage. And the only way, and we've learned this the hard way, frankly, over the last 40, 45 days, to plan for the future is to variabilize as much fixed cost as possible. It sounds a lot easier than it is, of course, to do. And as you variabilize the fixed costs, we all need to understand there's, in effect, you're transferring the ownership of risk to someone else. And when you transfer the ownership of risk, you should be prepared to pay a risk premium. And that's an important one to understand. When you convert a fixed to a variable cost, there is a risk premium that you need to pay for it, and one has to be prepared for it. In our business, as I'm sure for many people on this call, panelists and audience, fixed costs, the major fixed cost for us is people. And that is not something that we can wish away, because this is a short-term blip. We will need them back very quickly. The second largest component of the fixed cost is real estate for us. And the third one, not always very intuitive in a manufacturing setup, is inventory. We are trying very hard to navigate all these 3 buckets of fixed costs, and we can get into more details if we need to later on. On people, what we are trying, at least for the front end folks, the go-to-market folks, is to variabilize as much of their total comp as possible. And of course, the risk premium that you need to pay is that is a sweetener here. So if you're paying a 100% target variable comp earlier on, that target needs to change to 120, 130%. That's a risk premium that we should be prepared to or willing to pay to variabilize that comp. On real estate, it's fairly straightforward. How much can you get into a pay by the day, pay by the week, pay by the month? And of course, the risk premium there is the additional rental premium you need to pay. Inventory is an interesting one. We make products anticipating future demand. And that inventory sits in a warehouse, typically owned by us, in this case SKF. So not only are you ending up paying real estate costs, but that inventory is cash sitting on the shelves. The way we are thinking of variabilizing that fixed cost in a way is to transfer that risk into distribution. So the further away you can push that inventory onto distributors, the better it is for you to reduce your fixed costs. Your cash moves out into distributor zones, and your cost of storing the inventory goes down. And of course, the risk premium you pay there then is the margin you pay to distributors. So again, a few examples, at least from our perspective, what we are doing on variabilizing fixed costs. None of these are easy to do. It's easy for me to say it in 5 minutes, but of course, it's much, much more difficult to do it. So I'll stop here in the interest of time, but happy to jump into more details if needed.
That's very nice, very helpful, Manish. Good start. We'll come back to you, and I'd like to move on to Anil Goyal. Anil, you and I have had numerous discussions over the last 10 years about the hospitality and hotel industry. Many a times, there's been ups and downs for you with the Taj. At a time like this, when everything seems to be going completely haywire, what would your advice be to management? And both in the short and the medium term, in managing cost and thinking about the future of business? Would be great if you could shed some light on it.
Sure. Thank you, Sunit, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think that, bearing in mind the environment and the very unusual circumstances that we find ourselves in, when we reboot a business and, get back into activity on 18th of May or, thereabouts, we need to understand that these sands have shifted from under our feet. And therefore, we need to relook at how do I sit down and actually put in place a business plan, considering that multiple variables are in play, which is unusual and which has not happened in the past. Now, in this environment where everybody has been financially traumatized, whether you're in B2B or you're in B2C, the fact of the matter is organizations, corporates, companies, SMEs, and the individual consumer and the customer has been financially under stress. Net worth has gone down, cash flows have gone down, our income for Q4 of the last year is lower than what we thought it might be. And the outlook for our income for the next year is obviously lower than what we thought it might be. So in this environment, my recommendation that a good starting point is to dive into the month of my customer. Because there's nothing I can do unless I understand the customer's psyche today, which is very different to what it was yesterday or 2 months back. Let's put it that way. So the reality is that in today's environment, the customer is not in a tearing hurry to spend money lavishly. And in the near term, in the next few months, they will spend money only on must-have requirements. And anything that is, nice to have will be put on hold. That's the starting position. If we recognize that in this environment, business will be rebooted in an environment which is going to be customer pull as against a product push. So I cannot decide what I want to supply to the market. I need to read the minds of my customer and get feedback from him or that organization or group of organizations on how things are going to pan out over the next couple of years. That's a starting point. Once I have that, then I need to map that into my organization and I need to look at my product profile. What are the services I'm providing? What's my product mix? Where do I make money? Do I not make money? Where I'm getting volume, where I'm getting volume, and so on and so forth. And the last thing I want to do is lock into capital in getting into production or supply of goods and services where it's not moving off the shelf. And I'm complementing certain elements that were touched upon by Manish, which simply means that I have to zero down and understand which are my high margin products in my bouquet of that I acquired, which have a ready market or which will move off the shelf quicker than the others. This one in time, low margin products or new launches and stuff like that would be the back burner. So the first step is understand the new mode of consumer, number one, marry that into my own assembly line, into my product mix and so on and so forth, and then work out my production planning on how I'm going to unfurl this activity, hopefully this month. Now, not my eye from my customer.
Sorry, Anil, your voice is in and out slightly.
My costs. Okay, I will just repeat myself.
So maybe
the third important element is
you might like to just put your video off while you're speaking. That will be great.
Okay, I'll put my video off. Okay, so the third point I'm talking about is the importance of cost management. So let me put on the table a very important financial discipline, which is not very popular, but is topical in today's environment, which is called zero cost budgeting. All right. What this basically entails is that an organization has to go through the pain of being challenged on every single activity that hitherto has taken place, but typically takes place in the past. But now we will question and say whether that activity needs to be undertaken at all. Question number one. If it needs to be undertaken, can we undertake it a little differently? And can we undertake it at a lesser cost? And a good way of doing this is, which is not normally done because it's time consuming and it creates friction. A good way of doing this is to do it across every profit center and cost center in your organization. So let us say if you have 25 profit centers and 5 cost centers in an organization, you will have 30 odd trial balances. It's a little financial jargon, but the accountants will understand. A trial balance is basically a document that gives you granularity to what is reflected in your P&L account. So if you look at your payroll and your payroll is 300 crores a year or 3,000 crores a year, the trial balance will give you visibility of 80, 90, 100 line items that all add up into your payroll. So what I recommend is get into your zero activity budgeting, get into each line item that aggregates into a cost line that gets into P&L account, question it and challenge it. And I'm telling you, you will come up with multiple surprises and multiple opportunities where the cost needs to be cut down. So what I recommend is a combination of 3 things before I step back. Number one, look at your customer, look at the business from the lens of the customer. Number 2, over the next few months, your entire activity has to be programmed in line with what your consumer is willing to take from you. You can't push anything on him because there is going to be a pushback. And the third thing is, on a war footing, get into your entire cost architecture, granularity across all locations, and get into line by line challenging, and you will find huge opportunities to eradicate costs, which will benefit you even during the good time. I'll now take a pause and step back.
Thank you, Anil. Some very sound advice over here, especially coming, as I said, from an industry where people have seen a lot of ups and downs in the past as well. To your point, I was talking to a friend of mine just today in the travel business. He said that for short haul flights, they probably are now going to recommend that you don't use the toilet, don't get out of your seat. They may or may not serve you food, to your point, because in the zero-based costing model, people only need to get from Bombay to Delhi. They don't necessarily need to be eating on the flight. So I think this is some very sound advice, and everything can be, as you rightly said, reconfigured in the new order if you really want to, line by line. Thank you. Moving on to Aksh. You have a serious challenge, Aksh, clearly. 60,000 people being employed across various sectors. It would be good to just get a headline view that, how are your customers managing the cash? I know that, we all know that offices have been closed. Some of your staff are probably not going to be required for the temporary phase. Whether they will be required for the permanent phase, it all remains to be seen, but would love to get your insights on some of the key sectors that you are actually looking after, both from your perspective and the client's perspective who you service.
Sure. Thank you, Suneet. Am I audible enough? Okay. All right. So unprecedented times indeed. Everyone has spoken earlier. And current crisis is changing everything that we knew about life, work, and workplaces. So what we used to think earlier actually is no more applicable or is actually getting challenged. So when we think of this, of any crisis, for me, I think I look at it in 3 phases, or whether it's a crisis or it's a storm. So when you see a storm from a distance, and that's really the stage when it's coming, and that's the time when you start your preparation stage, and you start whatever resources, whatever time that's available for you. By the time the storm hits you, you start preparing and get into that mode. Second phase is when you are in the storm. And when you are in the storm, you are only thinking of how do you withstand the storm, or thinking of survival, making sure that you actually tide over this phase, and then you can actually emerge stronger. And then, of course, the third stage, where the storm starts receding, or the crisis starts slowing down, and people starts developing appreciation for the new reality, or whatever is the new normal. So our response to the current crisis have also been similar to the current situation, where we've thought we have the advantage of seeing what's happening in China. We had big, large operations of ISS in China as well. That's where it actually started off, and immediately we came into action. We created multiple scenarios in terms of what would the situation be, what would be the need of cash. At the end of the day, in these times, cash is a king. I mean, we all know that, and we need to make sure that we keep our powder dry. So at an organizational level, we deferred our dividends, which we never do. We tried, all the things which Manish said, and earlier was being spoken. We've tried to variabilize the fixed cost, but there's only a limited time. We also try to explore multiple financing options to make sure there is receivable financing available, vendor financing, which takes a much longer time. So we started that a while back, but also put together, put in the lines of credits and what we may need across multiple scenarios, in order to make sure that we preserve cash, and there is enough resilience in the organization to tide over the current crisis, knowing very well that it is something which is not going to last forever, and at some point in time it is going to normalize. And clearly, we all see how innovative the business is reacting to it. You spoke about, you gave an example earlier. I was talking to one of my friends in UK who runs a chain of dine-in restaurants, about 65 of them. And with no diners coming in to eat in the restaurants, he's converted that model into superstores, where you can come in, pick the food, ready to eat food, and then either it gets delivered at home or is given as a takeaway. And at this point in time, he's moving a step ahead to explore, can we actually avoid physical delivery, and can we use drones to actually carry the food and get it delivered on the doorsteps? So in a similar way, business is very, very fast evolving. Every 15 days is a new thing that we get to know. When I reflect back for ISS as an organization, we have 60,000 employees in India. Our focus has been three business segments, which is banking, business services and new technologies, and industry and manufacturing. So these are the three business lines, business segments that we've been focusing on. In addition to it, we also have something which we call specialized services, where most of the other industries, including retail, travel, entertainment industry, some marquee accounts in that area, they also, but we kind of put all those together. There are customers where there is which are in the direct line of storm, like the ones in the travel industry, like the ones in the hotel industry. But then there are some where the reality is going to hit in times to come. Okay, across all the three segments, we are adopting a strategy of which we proudly call as key account strategy, where we do not want to be everything for everyone, but we are trying to be everything for someone. So where we know the client very well, we work with the clients right from the start to the end, giving them all services from cradle to the grave. So when I look into our industry segments, so banking, of course, is under stress, but will be under tremendous stress, in coming months, when the NPAs will start hitting in. We've already seen rate cuts, demand is collapsing, so their top line will be under pressure. There is also a big shift from physical banking into digital banking and fintech companies coming up. So if the companies have not changed it dramatically, their current sort of operations and their apps and their user interface is not very employee friendly, they are the ones who are likely to lose. Similarly, business services and new technology, which is one of our other big segments that we play in. Uh, this work from home, I mean, right now also I'm at my home. This work from home has actually become this new normal, where, I mean, we understand this announcement from TCS, but in contrast, when we reflect back, 20 years, 20 years back, and as I had a bit of my career with an ITES company, Excel Services, we used to always have compartmentalized locations and areas which are clearly earmarked for clients. And IT security and data privacy would be the topmost reason why the work has to be done in the designated spot where you cannot carry your phone and you cannot carry anything along. And there are lockers outside. Very fast it has changed. The industry has responded immediately to get to a distributed network, and now the work, all of this is being done from home. So it does give opportunities, but of course in longer term we'll see some challenges in terms of IT security and data privacy, which at this point in time are at a lower priority. And similarly, I see most of our customers and most of the accounts are reeling under pressure from margin and from cash perspective. Okay, but so the way we are working with our customers is I think I can quantify the response in 2 or 3 broad buckets. One is because of our key account strategy, we understand our customers very well. We understand what their needs are, what their issues are, and how we can leverage it. So there is a paradigm shift from being a service provider to become an advisor for them. And we are actually at this point in time, working with most of our customers to see, forget what we used to do in the past, but right now let us see how we can help you protect your business and help you protect your employees and your workplaces. And we're bringing in a whole host of new technology. How can we improve the level of hygiene which can exist in offices, and how can we prevent cross contamination? We of course cannot eliminate everything, but we can certainly take up the level of hygiene in the organizations. One of the big shifts that we are also trying to work with our customers who are clearly under pressure of improving their margin and cash is India has traditionally been an input-driven model. So everyone, when you engage with an outsourced service provider, you actually specify what you need. I need an X amount of service, and I need these many number of people to do this job and what have you. And we're trying to take away their thinking from an input-based model to an outcome-based model, which means you just only worry about what you need and don't worry about what goes inside it, and leave it to the subject matter experts to make the best use of the resources available, whether it's tools, technology, equipments, and people, who are also cross-trained to do multiple things, and then deliver to you the services at a cost which is significantly lower than your current operating cost, plus at the same time meeting your expectations. The third thing which I'm also been advising and working with most of our customers is in terms of simplifying their operations. We are an organization where I remember when I was moving from Singapore, back into India, and the moment we took out the car outside from the airport, there was a boom barrier, and which goes up and down every time the car comes in, but then there will be a man standing close to the boom barrier to press the button. And we have in many ways complicated and disguised the need of what our service requirement is. I mean, it's time to stay frugal, it's time to to cut the flab, but also it's also time to simplify our operations. to see what we actually do not need and what we can actually do away with. And that's the other part that we are working with our organizations, our customers, to bring down their overall cost of operations.
That's very helpful, Aksh. Thank you. Some good insights there in terms of how the businesses are progressing. I wonder what will happen to your business with automation, like you said, the drones coming in. But yeah, I guess we are all going to have to wait and watch on that. I think tying this into what Manish had said earlier, probably in a way your business is going to increase, because if his largest cost is the people cost, or one of his largest costs, as he mentioned, was the people cost. And if you're talking about outcome based approach, then obviously there's a large chunk that can be outsourced to organizations like ISS. Something for all of us to think about. I know some people in the audience are friends of ours. Dr. Sanjay Arora, who I would love to get onto this podium, probably in the future. He runs, Suburban Diagnostics, which is a path lab, huge in demand right now. Probably he might want to consider outsourcing, some of the people that may not have been considered so far. But moving on, we want to keep the pace going, guys. So thank you very much. Rajesh, you're definitely not the least. I wanted to have you come in at the end of this round, primarily because you would have heard the other panelists. You have a lot to offer in terms of the legal guidance and advice that you provide to all of your customers. Would love to hear from you that what are you seeing today as some of the big changes, and how is the legal world and the implications of that from a legal perspective on business. So over to you, Rajesh.
Yeah, thank you, Sunit, for hosting us, first of all. You see, hearing from all my business stalwarts, friends, business is like, the golden goose, which we all must have to protect, and we can't kill this golden goose. The business community, the government, the bankers, the judiciary, I think all of us, or everybody has to come forward together to save this so that the business survives. This is also important from the business perspective and also from the economic perspective. Now, this also implies that the business should be scrupulous. We have all kinds of businesses going on. So when we are seeking cooperation, then it has to be scrupulous. That is also very important. As per my understanding and what I am advocating is in present times, that today is a time when everybody has to act like a statesman. Everybody has to be fair and come forward if we are leaning on each other. Clearly, there is a disruption. All of our clients are approaching us with serious disruption. And also the present time, we also see that there is an evolution process and also a process requiring a massive change. Now, when you talk of change, and from the legal perspective, again, I'm confining myself, there could be internal and there could be external. Now, internal change, when we talk about, it is like dealing with the employees. How do you deal with your employees? Is the first and foremost thing. Dealing with the stakeholders. Stakeholders are your all management people, your owners, your shareholders. Then creating technological platform for the employees. We are all talking about the new technology and the new changes. But if the employees are made available with these new technological platforms where they can show their efficacy, they can do their best, that is also very, very critical. Going from there, I believe that the accountability aspect is also very critical with the employees. Employees would be on technological platform where it is easy to remit information, receive information. And how do you maintain the data privacy issues, not only of your own company, but also of the people you're dealing with, the third parties involved? Aksh took this up and Aksh mentioned about this, which I think is very, very, very critical. Data privacy is going to become a very, very key factor. So when you talk about these employees and the stakeholders, everything, so what you need to do is, as a business people, probably you'll have to just go back to the drawing board and see whether your internal policies are compatible to all these changes we are talking about or not. And if the internal policies are not compatible, you have to change your internal policies. You might be required to redefine your internal manuals. Because today there will be flexibility around employment. There might be a rule how many people can come, not come to the offices, the social distancing issues and all that. So this would require a lot of labor to be done by each HR department, how to address all these problems. And then how to communicate with the employees is also going to be a big problem. And then how to make them understand the new environment. There will be a training element involved around that. I think some of us, when we call for our credit card help, now you will find that, the girls on the other side saying that because of COVID problem, this, that, they are operating with limited capacity, what is available, what is not available, and all those kind of stuff. So for the business community, the other challenge is on the external side. All of you sitting here or listening, now you have trade receivables. You have receivables in various formats to be received. Are you receiving them or not is a big challenge, because with this, I hear that a lot of money has dried up. Even the legitimate contractual dues are not coming forward. And then you have the payments to make. The payments to be made also, the payment obligations. There are bankers involved. There are dues payable to the banker. Now, is this 3 months moratorium period enough? Because at the end of the day, you have to pay the interest also. Moratorium may be there, but interest is not going away. You have to pay the interest still to the bankers. There are issues around landlord, issues around tenants. Somewhere you are landlord, somewhere you are tenant. The landlords are relenting. I mean, they are not willing to relent. They say pay the rent. All tenants are approaching the landlords, including us, that can you remit some rent for some time? That is another big issue which is flowing in. There are several commitments made by the business to invest in future businesses. You might be having your deals where you have agreed to invest and all that. How do you come out of the obligation if you're not ready right now? So I think from external perspective, what we are seeing is there is a lot involved how to redefine the contractual obligation. How do you go back and redefine with each such, it may be a banker or a landlord or whoever. How do you explain, how do you communicate, how do you redefine a contractual obligation so that you can sail through? Because these are not the normal times. These are times which nobody has witnessed. And for the first time, such experiences are being held. Again, from the external perspective, what we are talking to the client or advising them is look into your contracts. Just see whether you are able to even negotiate or not negotiate. Is there room for negotiation or not? We are also advising don't rush for legal notices. Don't go to court immediately, not required. Because you must communicate first. You must put in writing what you expect and why you expect. And what are those loopholes you find in the contract, if any, to describe your position. Therefore, communication again becomes key, not only internally, but also externally. We have several queries in this changing world that look, we have been hearing about act of God, the force majeure, and all that. If supposing we are not able to perform, can we just lean on this clause and come out of the contract? The answer is a strict no, because each contract defines itself and lays down when this right is available, when this right is not available, how this right is to be implemented. The judicial standards on this particular aspect of force majeure is very, very, very high. If you read judgments, out of 100, 99 judgments say this is not available. So whether your contractual clause is supporting on this force majeure or not, each person is to go back and to see their own clause. In India, there is no force majeure law as such. We only have Indian Contract Act, which talks about frustration of contract. So when the contract becomes unenforceable and which can't be executed because of change in circumstances, so you have to go and study each set of circumstances and the documents together with it, whether you are making out a case, whether your case can sustain in the court of law, that you can't contractually perform. The situation has changed completely. So therefore, these are some fundamental issues which are coming up internally and externally where we are involved. During this COVID time, you have seen the High Court, Supreme Court. Nobody imagined the judges and us, who are in our mid-50s or towards the 60s, that suddenly, all of a sudden in 10 days time, 15 days time, we will just shift to a technological platform, which has been done. The High Court, the Supreme Court, the lower courts are today operating on technological platform with Zoom help or other, facilities which are available. This was never expected. Such a big change in the judicial world itself. We have seen over 20 or 25 good judgments coming during this time, which have come to the rescue of business community. It could be invocation of the bank guarantees, or it could be performance guarantees, or it could be many other facts where courts have come forward and protected wherever required. They have also refused to protect where they felt that the businessman is trying to make out a case which is totally a case of cheating. There's nothing he is entitled to. They rejected also. So therefore, I think all these issues combined need to be looked into from the legal perspective. And suddenly, wherever the negotiations are failing and nothing is working out, and you have to protect yourself, then you have to go to the court. So I think let me take a pause here and hand it over back to you.
That's very helpful, Rajesh. Thank you. I don't want to ask, how many times your phone must have rung in the last 6 weeks during lockdown with people asking you all kinds of questions. But yes, I think this is a one time where perhaps, legal advice is really, really required. So thank you very much for that, for this sound advice. I definitely can't go to the courts in India for some time to come at least. So just for the benefit of the audience, we'll be extending the time of the panel discussion to 3:45. We will be taking questions from the audience at about 3:30. You may send in your questions now itself, and we will try to answer as many of them as possible. I have another round of questions for our panelists, post which we will then move into the audience questions. It would be helpful if you can kindly state, to whom you would like to answer this question from the panel, and your name as well. That would be really helpful. So moving into the next round of questions for our exciting panelists, folks. Prior to this, we also did a poll with about 50 of our customers that, what is their cash reserve? It was kind of interesting to note, and in a way heartening, that about 60% felt that they were quite comfortable in the cash position and would be able to sustain at least a short-term hit that we are seeing today on COVID. Of course, if there is a double whammy which comes in, then that could be, throw off all bets. But yes, 1/3 or roughly 40% did say that the cash position is either marginal or bad. We also asked them the question that what can improve your situation in the short term. I'll request my colleague to see if we can put something up on the screen for you. There were several, of course, it was different sector by sector, but several of our clients said that, they would require government intervention. Although that, was one thing that went quite unique sector by sector. Yes, we have it up on the screen. Thank you, Shayantan. That's very helpful. The orange color over here, friends, is conversion of fixed to variable costs, which is the crux of what Manish was talking about. It is quite a huge discussion going forward, because, everybody has realized that living in a, what does it really mean to live in a VUCA world? Everybody used to talk about this concept, VUCA. We heard it so many times. Finally, we have understood, and we have been hit by one of the biggest VUCA events. And yes, a lot of sectors across, which is the blue color, are actually seeing, that we will need to consider alternate and non-traditional sources of revenue, because the traditional sources of revenue most definitely are going to be hit depending on which sector you're in, from sector to sector. So that's very helpful, Shayantan. Thank you so much for that. Moving into the next round of questions, Anil, this time I'll request you to go first. Cash is, as you very rightly said, not only about cash, but it's also across the value chain, because there's huge impact from your suppliers to your customers. How do you suggest one thinks through this, Anil?
So you see, you have touched upon 4 variables that are necessary to decipher for us to put in place an indicative business plan, right? So we've talked about the customer, we talked about product mix, we've talked about reducing costs through zero-based budgeting, and we've talked about looking at the health of a supply chain, because unless I look at that and make sure that everything is in place, my vendors, my suppliers, my transport arrangements, wholesalers, distributors, etc., I cannot be effective in rebooting my business. Once that's done, let's say we put in place a 18-month business plan, sketchy, but it's giving us some kind of visibility of what I think the world is going to look like as far as my business is concerned for the next year and a half. And I'm looking at a hole in my cash flows. So we have to understand the importance of what needs to be done now, because in my opinion, how we manage our cash to make sure that the business stays afloat is going to change the batting order in my sector in the next 18 months. I may have been a market leader for the last 10 years, but if I don't manage my cash flows appropriately and in an efficient manner, I will give space in the market to competition, and somebody else who's got that liquidity will come in. So what is it that we need to do? Very clearly, if you are sitting on liquidity on your balance sheet as on date, then you have been blessed by God, and that's good. That's a good starting point. If not, pick up the phone and look at unutilized bank facilities that are there on the table, make that phone call and let your lenders know that you'll be drawing on those, and make sure that that cash is available. If you don't have facilities, then you need to get facilities in place. And now it's like a 100-yard dash, all right? Because everybody is going to be rushing to the banks, and banks are not in the mood to lend to everybody. So you need to basically make sure that next 6 months, 8 months, in some form or the other, using multiple options, which is a combination of cash that you might have, cash that you can draw down from the banks on facilities that are available, or you have a good relationship with banks, you're a AAA company, and therefore the banks will lend to you. Get those facilities in place. Look at your receivables because they are vulnerable. Because there's a very strong possibility that a lot of your relationship partner, not you, they will default, etc. Add that into the whole. And then look at your payables. Look at the quality of partnership that you have and have that conversation with your partners. And it's a discussion that needs to take place in a fair, transparent, and a win-win manner. There's no, flexing of muscles here, because at the end of the day, these relationships have to be honored. So the combination of looking at bank debt, incremental debt, looking at how you can get money out of your balance sheet will give you the oxygen that you need. The important thing that I want to share with everybody in the audience is the last thing you want to do is allow your company to get leveraged, because that's the last thing you want to do. Leverage is not a good thing, and certainly not in a recessionary environment, because if you are able to raise debt, but your business doesn't have the fuel to generate the cash flow in the next 2 years, then you're going to find yourself in a bit of a spot. So you must have a backup plan, and the backup plan is going to be, are you capable of raising equity? Now that will depend upon who your promoters are, what kind of background that organization comes from, what sector are you in, sector sentiments, and so on and so forth. But it is something that needs to be on the table. So the combination of looking at the short-term, let's say the working capital on your balance sheet, looking at short-term access to funds through banking setup, looking at ICDs, looking at commercial papers, raising money through NCDs, will help you and bail you out in the next 6 months. But depending upon what your business plan throws up and the ability of the organization, its attractiveness in the market, do not shy away from having an equity raising plan in place, even though the markets are not very strong right now. You may get diluted at a valuation that's not very attractive, but this is all about survival, and it is about textbook management of your balance sheet. You see, in my book, I'd written somewhere that events beyond our control can change the character of the balance sheet like a river in spate. And what we are witnessing is exactly that. Overnight, your balance sheet's character has changed because you have assets on your balance sheet that are not generating cash. They're not generating any cash for 2 months, for 3 months. And then once the economy opens up, you do not know the capability and ability of those assets to start generating cash and earn income for the company the way they did 3 months ago. So there's a uncertainty that you're dealing with. And the remedy for uncertainty is to make sure that you have a backup plan, as difficult as it might be, because equity is the most expensive way of funding a business. You'll know it. But my recommendation is don't shy away from that option. You must have that option and that backup plan, because at the end of the day, it is liquidity that will help us come out, reboot my business, survive the next 12 months, and stabilize my business, and then make sure that I don't lose my footing. So all possible, it will take a herculean effort, and it will take the CFOs and his treasurer to burn the midnight lamp, make all those phone calls, and be the first off the block to make those calls. That's my recommendation.
Thank you, Anil. Some sound words coming from the last 35 years of your career, clearly. Manish, I would like to also ask you the same question, because while I'm sure that you are probably in that 60%, which is reasonably well capitalized, but we discussed this, that if the retail outlets are not open, or if people are not buying on those retail outlets the way you want them to, on the other hand, your vendors are small companies, SMEs, your being well capitalized is not enough. So I know you have some thoughts on that. Would love to hear from you, Manish.
Thank you, Sunit. I was told to lean forward so people can hear me, so I will do that. I'm also looking at the clock here. 3:30, you have Q&A session, so I'll try and keep it really, really quick. Yes, it's not enough. We are at least for us, we are in the middle of this value chain. There's customers ahead of us, the supplies behind us. And we have to look at cash from their perspective also. Well, what's applicable to us is also applicable to them. So if I'm telling all my sales guys, and I'm going to make it really specific here, if you can help variabilize fixed costs for your customers, you can gain share in this recessionary market. The old way of selling is gone. The old way of selling is what? For a B2B company like us, our sales guys go and speak to the purchasing folks. You know, I'm producing something, you need something, here's a schedule, here's supply. If you're still speaking to the purchasing folks, if your sales guys are still speaking to the purchasing folks, fire your sales guys. Because the purchasing folks are giving them information that is absolutely immaterial, irrelevant, because they're doing their job. If you call an automotive company saying, hey, how much do you want? What's your schedule? You'll hear, I'm opening up on May 17th, send me all the stock. But the fact is, how many of us are going to walk into a car showroom on May 17th and book a car? No one. June 17th, very few. So your sales guys have to first of all go and speak to folks in the business and not the purchasing folks. Number one. Number two, if you can come up with a model which will variabilize their fixed costs, it will be a win-win. So what we are trying to do is, stop selling bearings. Don't sell a lack of bearings and leave it there. Sell the outcome or sell OPEX. So convert all the CAPEX to OPEX, and you will gain share, you will increase revenue even in this downturn market. For folks who are not thinking like this, will lose. So I will stop here and come back in the Q&A if there's anyone for me.
Very helpful, Manish. Thank you so much. Aksh, I have a quick question for you, which is very important given that you are in the people business. Your people are right now in the firing line of obviously a real and serious threat. It would be very interesting to know how you are actually managing things like morale for them, and of course, obviously their safety, which must be paramount for you today at this point in time.
Sure. Thanks, Sunit. But before I respond, I just couldn't help notice on the earlier graph that you presented, you also had very little yellow color, which you did not speak about, which was the government intervention. And
we have never been able to really depend on that in India. That's the problem. Nobody knows.
No, exactly. And in contrast to what we have in Australia with JobKeepers Act, and Singapore, the job support scheme, and Netherlands and UK, the situation here in India is of course very different, where the financial stimulus that we were all hoping is still very gradual, to come by. I think coming back to your specific questions about employees, I think there are two ways. We are, our key account strategy, one way is a great help for us, where, like I said, so right now we have our employees in COVID specialty hospitals, which are working in patient care, providing the much needed services, whether it's cleaning, PCA, or what have you, in many hospitals. We have our teams, security teams, working with a lot of local police stations. So the police right now, the local authorities, they are running out of strength to control this lockdown and law and order. And we are providing our people to work with them as extended arm of theirs. So we are trying to do as much that we can do for community. I mean, we internally also, as an organization, we started a solidarity fund, to help out the frontliners. I think one of the big ways to, while as an organization, ISS has a service culture right from the top down to the bottom, and I see my frontliners much more than I would imagine most of the CEOs actually would know who's on the assembly line and the shop floor. So we have a service culture which is ingrained in our DNA, but a lot more at this point in time, where the important part is how do we communicate to our employees? How do we stay in touch with them? What sort of call tree mechanisms that are in place? How do we give them the comfort to our employees? So, and when I say our employees, we not only count our employees, we also extend the definition to include our customer employees. So, if the offices have to be created safe, how do we? One part is is doing things. The second part is also creating the perception about the fact that you're coming into a safe and a hygiene environment, and that's what we continue to do with our customers. Our customers are continuing to support us. There are regular meetings and reviews and rounds and communication through all social media. Today you'd be surprised, most of our frontliners, they have a smartphone, and through the employee apps, a lot of those communication can take place. I think the only way to operate in this environment, and while I'm just so amazed to see how much work can actually be done while sitting at home, of the 60,000 employees that we have, we still had about 35,000 of them still manning the jobs and still work getting done. So that's about 60% of the work that continued all throughout and never got stopped. Over last 40-45 days as well. So I think the culture of the organization, the communication tree that we can set up, the support from and working closely with our customers, making sure that we and us are on the same side of the fence and it's not one versus the other. And also, like Rajesh mentioned, in some ways, the health of the contracts. These are the four things that helped us, and is also helping us to continue the business, and also making sure that the employee morale continues to be high up, even during these testing times. Thank you.
That's really interesting. Probably nobody sees it as closely as you are seeing it today. So, Rajesh, I'd like to ask you the last question. We are kind of winding down to the end of the webinar, and would like to have at least a few questions being asked by the audience. There are quite a few that have come in, but I would still like to ask you that, as you see the opportunities now going forward for businesses, which are obviously going to be significantly different, because the landscape is changing in many different ways. One of them itself is the way our workplaces are changing. I don't want to specifically bias this towards people, but there are numerous changes that we all know are going to be taking places in businesses, which are going to obviously throw up both challenges and opportunities in the future. Rajesh, what do you feel would be some of the areas that companies must keep in mind from a legal perspective, so that they don't fall foul of the law going forward?
I think very quickly, on all such matters, very important that they should have a list of do's and don'ts in these circumstances. The do's may include the same thing, looking at their contracts, communicating wherever there is a trouble, seeking legal recourse only if it's required. But what they must not do it is very important, that some of the firms, some of the companies which we see regularly in our banking practice under the IBC and before the NCLT, they should not be fudging their accounts. They should be not manipulating their accounts in any manner. They should not be siphoning off the funds in any manner, because today the criminal justice system as well as IBC has become very strong. People have lived with it, they have escaped also, but today the environment is totally different. So it's very important that ethics of business is maintained, and no such thing is done under pressure, which comes and puts them to further troubles in addition to what the existing ones are. And so far as the opportunities are concerned, we are all talking and listening about this manufacturing base perhaps being shifted to India. We are also listening quite a bit about the ease of doing business in India is being redone by the government of India. If all these opportunities come, then they should be ready for these opportunities, because if such opportunities come, they would require capital, they would require equity, they would require debt. So depending on the nature of industry you are in, you can keep at least talking to the right people, so that when you need help, that help is available. Lastly, from my side, the technological platforms are going to be built up. Now, this is a new area completely, the kind of technological support which businesses and professions in India require. Those kind of support don't exist. So there is a huge opportunity lying in this technological platforms also, which should not be ignored. Similarly, we are hearing about pharma industry, that the kind of hygiene expectation now would be not only at the place of work and home, any restaurant, any hotel, any airline you visit, all those are going to throw tremendous opportunity. Similarly, the health and how do you maintain your health, I think all these things are going to be the new sectors, new opportunities, which must not be ignored, and necessary infrastructure around this should be created.
Thank you, Rajesh. Yes, I think the hygiene is probably going to be the number one paramount as far as anything to do with hospitality industry is concerned. It would be interesting to see when people actually would be happy to walk into a restaurant again for a meal, and what is going to motivate them to do that.
Absolutely.
But I'm sure, and I hope that it does come back to normal very soon, like everybody else is also thinking. So we have some questions that have been coming in through, and we won't have obviously time to answer all of them, folks. So there is a question here for Anil, that, you know, obviously in such challenging situations, the entire economic chain is suffering. How do you elongate the working capital cycle? Anil, that
See, the issue is, yeah, I would look at it from two subsets. The first is the working capital already deployed in my business prior to closure, right? Because that was the normal scale at which I was operating. So I have X crores of receivables, X crores of inventory, X crores of payables, etc. So there's a certain status and cash in hand, etc., that I have inherited as on date. And then there is my requirement for the future. So typically what's going to happen is that this will have to be balanced out in terms of how I want to run the business going forward. What does it mean? What it means is there's a conflict in my mind on how do I reboot my business and get my products back in the market. And if I get my products back in the market, my distribution network will expect the same kind of credit period that I give to them in the past. Maybe they will expect more. So there's friction already happening there. At the same time, most of my vendors, who by and large and very often are of a profile that their organization smaller than my organization, are also people who are stressed out. So the problem is there's no answer in terms of how you deal with this. For that each organization will train over thin ice and trying to figure out what's happening. So what's going to happen is, in my opinion, actually the efficiency of working capital will not improve in the near term. What can improve is what's in my control. That means new production is controlled, linked to what throughput can actually go into the market and a product mix that can go into the market. That means I don't manufacture and supply something that doesn't sell, number one. Number two, I don't manufacture and supply something which makes a negative margin, number two. That means I have to be very, very smart in the way I reboot my business, where I make sure I take short steps, small steps, but every action, every sale that's generated, every production item, etc., gets into the market and gets off the shelf. So it will call for a very intelligent re-engineering of my production planning, which has to be aligned to what the market can offtake. So the limited point I'm making is going to be difficult to improve the quality of my working capital, and I will have to supplement the gap in my working capital through infusion of cash into the business. That's the way I see it. Because I cannot force the market's hand. I'll have to run along with the market.
Thank you, Anil. Very helpful. We have time just about for one last question, probably. So I'm sorry to the audience, but let me say that thank you, first of all, for being very patient, listening very nicely. I know it's not like a real situation where you can stand up and ask questions. But don't worry, we'll send you a copy of the recording to all the participants. We'll also be sending you a white paper that synopsizes what you heard today. Sometimes the audio doesn't work very well, so we will make sure that we've captured everything that got discussed today for you. The last question for the day, Manish, this is for you. One of our audience wants to know if you're thinking about technology today, digital, to actually reduce cost. Any thoughts around that?
Well, we're not thinking of technology today. We're thinking about it some time now, but the COVID situation has only made us think a lot faster, but more importantly, move a lot faster. we really want to move and to a digital sales model. We are beginning with the front end. By digital sales, I don't mean e-commerce. It's only a very small part of it. How best can we reduce our cost to serve customers and improve the efficiency? And it goes back to the opening question on fixed costs, variable costs. If today you have 100 customer service people answering phones, how can you deploy them a little better? Why do you need to have distributors calling and placing orders? Why can't you move to a zero touch orders by distribution? And we are moving towards that. We have distributors who are calling us and saying, where is my truck? And there are simple track and trace tools off the shelf which you can deploy right now. So there are many, many low-hanging fruits out there. Don't try and create this big giant kahuna. There are many small things that you can do right now. And absolutely, digitalization has to be part of a strategy with or without COVID. And if you don't do it, someone else will do it. And that will not be good for you.
Thank you, Manish. Is there anything that you might like to add, Aksh or Rajesh, if there's anything that you think got missed out that was important that you wanted to say? We have about 5 minutes left, so would be happy to have you say something if you think there's something important that you would want to add to the discussion.
No, I think just in the interest of time, I won't say much, but just that when I was growing up, we used to read a lot about Jack Welch, and one of the things that one of the quotes that he would always say is "change before you have to." So, which is the need of the hour at this point in time. Everything is changing, and if we do not change ourselves, we would actually be forced out of the business or forced to change. So that's the only message I want to give. Back to you, Sunil.
Thank you. It's I guess our 160-second advertisement break over here. People should not go away thinking only in lighter vein that we are an event management company. I'm sure all of you know that Hunt Partners is a leadership and board advisory firm. This is our way of giving back to the community to help all of you understand what the leadership agenda should be. We've heard from some outstanding panelists today about how they are managing their companies, their situations. It is very, very drastic out there. There's no question about that. I ask, as obviously my business is to talk to about at least 5 to 6 people every day. And I can tell you, friends, that there's just one thing that is common that everybody has said. Nobody knows. So with that, let me allow you to go back to your work, whatever you're doing. Nobody says cheers anymore. We all stay healthy, stay safe. Stay tuned is what I'm also adding for our next webinar, which is coming up in 15 days. We will keep the theme going where we are going to be talking to CEOs, as I said, those who are fighting in the trenches with their troops, to come and give you some very relevant and exciting suggestions and ideas of how they are tackling the situation. So once again, to my panelists, thank you so much for being a wonderful, wonderful group. Gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure today. And to the audience, once again, thank you for joining us. We have about 150 people in the audience, so thank you so much once again. Take care, bye, have a nice evening.